Welcome to the Be What You Want podcast. My name is Chris Hall, and today I'm speaking with Drew Dyck. Now, Drew is the author of Your Future Self Will Thank You. It's a study about wisdom and lessons from both brain science, but also the Bible. Now, today I want to welcome Drew to the podcast because he comes from an interesting background of being an editor at Moody Publishers, which is a Christian-focused publishing company, and he's also the former editor of the Leadership Journal. Now, I want to have a discussion about the idea of the future self from both these points of view. And the thing is that for the people that are listening or watching this, even if you're not Christian, I think I very much want to welcome you to the conversation because, I was brought up a Catholic. I'm not practicing in any of that anymore. I would consider myself more spiritual. But the thing that I do now know very much, because I love going down these rabbit holes, is that I think there's so much wisdom from religion, spirituality, ancient texts, all of these areas of the world. So whether you're practicing or not, it doesn't matter. Drew has got so much wisdom to bring to the table here. His work has been featured on the Huffington Post, USA Today, the Christianity Today, and also CNN. So look, I'm rabbiting on. Let me welcome this fine gentleman to the show, Drew Dyck.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. That introduction was very generous. Makes me sound more important than I am, which I love. So
awesome. Let me inflate your ego so that you can't even get out your door. You'd be like a big balloon.
Sounds wonderful.
Look, now the thing is that naturally I'm a very future focused kind of guy. So I naturally understand in my coaching practice, I very much try to say to people, look, we can have what we've got going on for us now and our attitudes and psychologies and, things that are present for us, but none of that really kind of means as much unless we can understand the future that we're going towards. So I was naturally attracted to your book title because I kind of resonate with that. Now, within that, I like to get straight into it. I believe that one of the core tenets of your book is indeed self-control. So we're talking about the future self and how your current self will thank you if you can bring those two pieces together. Can you give us an insight as to why self-control in particular is so important?
Well, sure. And you alluded to it already. I think it is a challenge sometimes to kind of project out into the future and imagine how your current actions are going to affect your life, a week down the road, a month down the road. And yet, I think if we have any sort of imagination, it's not hard to see that exercising a little self-control in the immediate has a huge impact on the person that we become, and it impacts, of course, the people that we love, the people all around us. And so that's why I think it's so important, because if you fail to control some of your, some laziness, we all have that tendency towards passivity to kind of, instead of doing the hard work that we need to do today to watch Netflix or just kind of chill out somewhere. And it's nothing wrong with doing that once in a while. But if you always take the easy way out and you don't control yourself in any area, spending, eating, relationships, whatever it is, then down the road, your life actually gets more and more difficult. And then your future self looks back at your old self and says, hey, you didn't do me any favors back then.
Exactly. I think also in the developed countries around the world, whether it be me in Australia, people in the UK, people in the States, like we don't often realize just how good we've got it. We really truly are a very first world kind of country and mindset. And we've got people listening all around the world here. But I think there is something about there's something about that, isn't there? The fact that we can just have as much food as we need to, either delivered via Uber Eats or something like that, or watch Netflix, or just kind of have life, I know that life is hard, and I know we've still got to work and turn up and do things, and that life has got many challenges, but also we've never had it better. And I think there's something in, I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's a media portrayal or whether it's some kind of part of the culture nowadays, but sometimes we just need a good old slap in the face where we go, wait a minute, like it's so good. And actually, I think there's a link there to self-control, because actually when we've got it so good, perhaps it can maybe tend towards not being quite so grateful for realizing what we've got in front of us. And that's the link, isn't it?
Yeah, so true. And I think it's worth mentioning too that we live in a very consumeristic culture, whether it's Australia, Europe, the States, right? And part of that is because we do have this amazing level of affluence, and it's really an awesome thing in many ways. But we're also inundated by messages that tell us to gratify every impulse that you have. Don't hold back. Eat that chocolate dessert. Take that vacation. Spend that money. Buy those clothes. Right? And so I'd say culturally, we're much more into self-expression and gratifying our desires than we are into restraint, self-control, discipline, right? Those are kind of dirty words for a lot of people. They think, oh, that's boring. I don't want to talk about that. It's like confining. It's the cop that shows up and shuts down the party. But my argument, the soapbox I'm on these days is, hey, listen, that's ultimately what's going to make your life better. Not running up the credit card today, not dialing it in, but exercising a little bit of self-control, a little bit of discipline to truly make your life better.
Absolutely. Consumerism and Western culture teaches, if you want it, you can have it now. So literally, if you want it, you can have it now. That's literally, it's kind of in the psyche, isn't it? So discipline can be.
Don't wait. Yeah, don't wait. Buy today.
Have it now. Yeah, buy now. This Easter sale, whatever it is. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that is interesting. And then I think there's also, like, I draw a quick parallel to the martial arts as a practice, right? You know, if I listen to people like Joe Rogan in Los Angeles talking about mixed martial arts and all this stuff, and they talk about how in the discipline there is freedom. So literally, by having discipline, actually you can find freedom in other areas of your life, and that you don't get to realize unless you adopt a discipline. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It is. I think that's why a lot of people are reaching back towards ancient disciplines, philosophy, and faith, right? Because I think when you look at our contemporary culture, there's not a lot there to ground people in the discipline of life and to kind of do the things that you need to exercise self-control. But yeah, so if you're in martial arts, man, you get a whole dose of discipline there. For me, as I'm a Christian, right, I look to my tradition, and there's a rich heritage of developing self-control. Not just for yourself, but for the purposes of loving other people well and serving your fellow humans as well. And so I think that's important. And in some ways, it's too bad because it's a bit of a lost virtue, I'd say, in our culture.
Yep.
Like I said, it's something that, you know, when I'd mention it to people, I'd hear a lot of sighs and groans. They're like, "Oh yeah, I should be better about self-control." You know, there's a recognition that we need more of that, but often we find ourselves just kind of unable to do it. But yeah, I think if you can, and it doesn't have to be that hard, if you can just make your self-control just a little bit better, I think you see huge dividends in your life.
Absolutely. And I was doing a seminar yesterday for some students, right, in Sydney. And one of the things I said about, for example, happiness or success, and I want to draw a parallel here, is that often we can project this idea of happiness, success, or the results that we want in our life, and we can project it out there like an external thing to us. But my kind of bombshell of truth was like, you know, here's the truth bomb. Stop thinking about your life out there. Like one day I'll be happy, or one day I can get it when it's external to me. All of this stuff actually comes from inside. And the same thing goes for self-control. You have to generate that stuff from within. And this is what traditional practices and either methodologies or religious practice or indeed jiu-jitsu, whatever it is, if you've got something that you can go to that provides the structure, the accountability, and the discipline, then it's a wonderful mixture of all those things together.
That's huge. That's so brilliant, because, you know, one of the things that I stumbled across when I was researching for this book was looking at these brain scans of people. And basically what they found is that when we think about our future selves, if you think about yourself 5 years down the road, your brain behaves in exactly the same way as if you think about a different person altogether.
Yes.
So it's really interesting. We don't even think of ourselves as ourselves in the future. And when we think of our future self, we think that person's going to have unlimited willpower, that they're going to be incredibly productive, that they're never going to get tired, that they're always going to defeat temptation, right? And so we have these delusions about our future selves that, yeah, in 5 years, I'll be incredible. I'll be amazing. I'll work hard. I'll do the right thing. I'll lose the weight. I'll run every day, whatever it is. But the truth is, like you reminded those students, no, that's got to start today. That can't just be some projection out into the future, because guess what? When you get to the future, you're going to be your same old self if you don't start doing things differently right now.
So spot on if you don't start, right? So let me layer on another brain science thing here too, because I think I'd like to explore the brain science area as well. There's a guy called Dr. Joe Dispenza who is published through Hay House, right? And one of the things he talks about, which is kind of becoming more of a common theme in certain realms, is the idea that when you, say, for example, meditate, and I think the same could go for prayer, right? And, you know, there are parallels and similarities. If you're meditating or praying and thinking about the future and actually really feeling, this comes to the mind-body connection idea here, if you're feeling gratitude in the moment for that future thing and conceiving it as already a reality, what happens, apparently, which I love the idea of, is that synaptically you start to create these pathways in your brain that go, oh, I already am that. So it's the idea of like making a connection between your heart and your mind to say, I can see this future self and I'm unlimited, but I can feel that. And I'm saying thank you because I've already achieved it, so to speak. But what that does is it's a positive impact in the now. And then you kind of go, well, I can do that. I want it. And hey, it's already happened. So what's your perspective on that? Do you agree with that sort of mind-body connection and the idea of rewiring some of the stuff up here?
Right. I think, yeah, I do. And I think that's fascinating because it's not just, a positive image in your head that's going to help you. It's actually changing you at the neurological level.
Yes.
And that's fascinating, right? And yeah, back to meditation and prayer. I read a lot of studies that showed, and these aren't kind of just, one-off studies. Hundreds of studies on meditation and prayer have actually shown that both of those activities, even if you're doing 5 or 10 minutes a day, actually boosts your willpower, that emotional energy that you need to do hard things and to withstand temptation. Right. And it's funny because I remember even reading an article in the New York Times by an atheist who said, maybe I should start praying, even though I don't believe in God, because it has this incredible benefit for self-control. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, there's some of these practices. And the funny thing is often, if you're not very good at these things, at meditation or prayer, and you try them, they actually have a greater benefit because it takes that intentionality and effort to make progress in this area. It's what researchers call a keystone habit. So there are just habits, and you've probably heard of this. Keystone habits are these habits that exert a positive influence across the spectrum of your life. So if you do certain things, like if you meditate every morning, you will actually be more productive in your work. You will be more likely to eat healthily. You maybe will be less likely to snap at your kids. It's going to exert this positive impact. So yeah, when it comes to this topic, I encourage people, it's not just about, getting better at conquering your to-do list. There's a spiritual element to this. And,
Yes.
I understand everyone's in a different place spiritually, but if you look at some of these practices, it's hard to deny the power that they have.
Oh, 100%. And it's the practice. I mean, here's the thing. I don't want to, forgive me for being bold about making a comment in a realm that I'm not actively practicing myself, but I was brought up a Catholic, so I get the ideas, right? So, one way of practicing Christianity is to solely go to church. And that's great. You can do that, you can do that experience. But in addition to that, my personal opinion is that you need to have that connection directly with God, right? Or spirit, or whatever it is that you've got a connection with, because it kind of links to my original point there, that if we solely just go somewhere once a week and think that, it's out there, like if I go to church, then I'm being a Christian, right? Or if I go once a week to the gym, then I'm looking after my body. Well, actually it's kind of got to be that consistent turning up, and it's got to be you practicing it throughout your day and throughout your life. And I think that's an example in the context of prayer, and literally the same idea goes for meditation, right? Or yoga. For me, I'm a yogi. So I went to the yoga this morning. That's my mind, body, spirit connection, where I'm getting on the mat, moving my body and connecting, right? So it's all kind of the same, and it's fine. And it's everyone's personal choice and personal belief, and that's beautiful. But the commonality is the responsibility, the personal responsibility that we take to turn up and practice, and not just be like it's not a cop out. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not saying going to church is a cop out, but like you got to practice it all the time, right? That's my point.
Absolutely. No. And that actually squares with, what Christians believe about our faith, right? That it's not just something where you can go to church and check the box, or, even ascribe to a certain set of beliefs and then you're done. It's got to be something that kind of is ingrained in your life. And like you said, practices that actually connect with the core of who you are. And, that's one thing when it comes to this topic of developing willpower, self-control, and discipline. Man, it's got to impact the habits of your life. Right. So often we think that the decisions that we make are the pure outcomes of our rational thought. Well, okay, if I know that exercise is good for me or eating well is good for me, I'm going to do that. Of course, we all know that. We all know how to get in shape. We all know what we should be eating. We all know how we should treat our spouse and our kids and all that stuff for the most part, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem is often we go into those situations with good intentions and we have the right knowledge in our head, but then we default to bad habits because so much of our actions are the result of habits, those unconscious automatic routines that we fall into. And so changing your behavior and the way that you actually live requires giving intentional thought to our habits. I spend a lot of time in the book talking about habits for this reason, even though it's not self-control per se. But if you can get into a healthy habit in your life, like The person who wakes up and runs 5 miles every morning, they're not going psyching themselves up going, okay, I got to do it. I just got to muster up the willpower. No, it's a habit, right? It's easy for them because they've built that routine into their life. And so if you can do that, I love, there's one quote from a guy named John Ortberg, and it's this. He says that habits eat willpower for breakfast. And what he means by that is if there's one person going into a situation and they're counting on willpower to succeed, and there's another person who's going in with a good habit, bet on the habit guy every time. So I think that's a big part of the issue.
I love that. And another thing that also reinforces habits is that emotional feeling as well. So willpower and intention can kick us into a new habit, and the consistency of practicing it generate a new habit. But then we also need to feel and see the results. And this is where I'll bring in the idea of Trinity as well, that we are truly mind, body, and spirit, right? So, quite literally, I think the misconception in common culture is that we're separate and we can just mentally treat something or just emotionally treat something, and like, oh, I don't want to talk about spirituality or spirit because I don't believe in that stuff. Like, actually, frankly, it's quite inescapable when you start accessing this stuff that they're all connected, and that the more you can enmesh those together and celebrate and connect to all three levels, then actually that's, I think, one of the ways that you can support and bolster the generation of a really positive habit.
Yeah, no, you're right. We're integrated beings, and I think you need to pay attention. And again, I understand this is tricky because everyone has different beliefs about how we're composed as human beings and about the supernatural and various worldviews and all the rest of it. But I think on some level, people acknowledge that we're spiritual creatures, that we have this thirst for a transcendent purpose in our life. It's not enough just to merely give us the right information to do the right thing, that it's a little more complex than that. I love what you said too about using your willpower to initiate good habits. One of the big aha moments for me in researching this topic was when it came to willpower. About 20 years ago, researchers discovered something about willpower that I thought was interesting, and that is it's a finite resource. It runs out.
Interesting.
It's limited, and I won't get into all the studies, but basically, they make people do demanding things, and then one group has to do a puzzle after, and then this other group doesn't have to do anything. Anyway, basically, if you did something difficult right prior to doing the puzzle, you would give up faster. And so they realized that people, it's not just a matter of like if you're physically tired, but if you have this limited pool of willpower that can be depleted, and it runs out pretty quickly. Now, the good news is, as you do harder things and develop discipline, your willpower is like a muscle; it can grow, right? But there's never enough. You just cannot develop enough willpower. So the key is to use that precious, limited, finite quantity of willpower to initiate good habits. Because when you're in a routine of a habit, you're not using willpower anymore. So that's a good way to preserve your limited willpower.
That really fascinates me, actually. Right. So I would, there's two words here, push and pull. So now that you've said that helps add some wisdom to my own mindset of willpower is a pushing energy, right? And then the pulling energies are both our emotions and spirit, if you believe in that, or consciousness, or whatever you believe in. Because when you start seeing and literally feeling the positive result, that's a pull toward energy of, I want to feel so invigorated like I do at the end of a run, or praying or meditating, whatever it is that gives you that emotional kick and connection. That's a pull energy, right? It pulls you towards because I want that again. And then, of course, there's an interesting linguistic route to inspire, to be in spirit, to be inspired, right? So
nice.
Think about that, right? So really inspiration and emotional benefit are the pulling energies, and willpower is the pushing energy, and you combine that together and boom, you got a cake.
I love it. Yeah. And I think I love the way you're conceiving of that, because it reminded me of something else in my research. The pushing component of that is important in some ways, but when it takes the form of guilt or just kind of beating yourself up, some people think that they can beat themselves up and sort of motivate themselves to live the life they want to. But the research doesn't really bear that out. Like, I think of there's a phenomenon that diet researchers actually coined called the what the hell effect. And this refers to when they're doing a diet and someone has a small indiscretion, say they eat a candy bar or a piece of pizza. What follows that small indiscretion is usually a full-on binge, because they just go, what the hell? It's over, right? I messed up. I feel bad about myself, and now I'm just going to indulge, right? There's another phenomenon they call the blank, the blank slate effect. Basically, when you feel like you have this blank slate and you're just like starting fresh, your behavior actually improves. So one of the things I tell people, if you're struggling with kind of this besetting habit, this bad habit in your life that seems to really get you down, don't sit there and beat yourself up about it, right? Because then that's just going to spur even worse behavior. You really just need to go, you know what? Even if this is like the 10th time this thing's taken me down, I'm going to start fresh. I'm going to be optimistic. Then once I get some success, once I taste that success and it changes my life, I'm going to get that kind of pull of the rewards of the good behavior, if you will. And that can make a big difference.
Very cool. And the word diet has the word die in it. People don't like to die, right? So I'm killing off my munchies.
That's a great point.
Right. And then my wife's a health coach, right? And so one of the terminologies that she was taught, which really works, is crowding out. So the idea is that you can crowd out your binges with healthy things and healthy choices. And I think and again, that blank slate effect is interesting. If you kind of go, rub it all clean, hit what's the life I want positively, and how can I crowd out so that stuff doesn't even kind of come in anymore? So I would like to make a segue to procrastination, sir, because Drew, I am fascinated to hear, right? What's your take? Why do people procrastinate?
Yeah, well, I feel a little weird talking about it because I'm like the chief procrastinator. This has been it's a tough thing for me ever since, college, and waiting to the night before a essay is due and cranking it out that night or even the morning of. So yeah, it's been something I've struggled with. I think it's complicated. It kind of comes back to immediate gratification, right? Because if you're procrastinating on something, difficult report at work or whatever it happens to be, it's because right now it's a lot more fun to watch TV or, take a nap than it is to do that work. And so one of the strategies that I recommend to people is to take that imaginative leap forward and imagine how good it will feel when you actually accomplish whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, or finish that report or do that thing, and how bad it will feel if you get there and you didn't do it. Because at the root of it, in a way, procrastination is kind of a delusion about time, right? You think, well, I can slack off now. I don't need to work hard, and I'll still somehow get that reward in the future. But the truth is you won't, right? We have an expression in religion, what you reap, you will sow, right? What you put into the ground today is going to spring out tomorrow or, down the road. And that's the thing to keep in mind about procrastination. Another thing about this topic is that I think what freezes people and causes them to procrastinate is whatever task they have to tackle seems too big and daunting. So one of the just very practical thing is, man, just break it down into tiny steps. Just, I say to myself, for instance, writing is such a hard thing for me. I procrastinate brutally. So I just say, you know what? And I think, I want to write for 3 hours today. And I go, you know what? I'm just going to go for 5 minutes. That's it. Just 5 minutes of writing. And then you get in there and you play the few sentences, and all of a sudden, oh man, it's been 20 minutes. Then maybe you get an hour in, right? And so if you can just kind of start small, it's amazing how that just kind of gets you going. And then you can conquer procrastination that way.
I love it. And there's some, maybe for another conversation another day, but there's some psychological biases in that example of, for example, when you're writing just for 5 minutes, where you almost start competing with yourself. And there's always things that can kick in subconsciously and consciously that, cause you to go harder and faster and longer.
Right. Starting is often the hardest part.
It is. Yep. Yep, absolutely. Okay. How can self-control lead to personal freedom?
Yeah, and this goes back to what I was saying before. I think self-control gets a bad rap in our current climate because we think it's kind of boring, or people think it's like Victorian and repressive or something. Especially, it just got some bad connotations. But I think the paradox is that if you can develop self-control in your life now, that opens up your life, and it actually allows freedom and flourishing. So, for instance, if today I go out and I rack up my credit card, because that would feel real good. There are a whole bunch of things I want. But if I don't exercise self-control and I spend way too much, that's going to feel good in the moment. But then we all know what happens, right? In a couple of weeks, the bill comes due. All of a sudden, I have to work more. I have to deny myself other things that I want in order to pay that credit card off. And so your life actually gets narrower because of your bad decisions in the past. So when I say it leads to freedom, I mean, man, it actually multiplies your options. And I think the bigger thing is not just for yourself, because I mean, sometimes we think, okay, what can I do to make my life better? And that's fine. And that's important. But then when I think about how can I actually contribute to the lives of others? How can I love other people well? I mean, if I blow all my money on myself, I can't be generous with other people, right? If I don't control myself and I'm not faithful to my spouse, that's going to cause problems too, right? I mean, it just right across. Researchers call self-control an instrumental virtue, meaning that you need self-control in order to acquire other virtues. And if you think about it, I mean, you can't be honest without self-control. You can't be faithful. You can't be patient. You can't be kind. You know, whatever virtue you're talking about is really difficult to develop without self-control. And then ultimately, you can't live the life that you really want to live.
As you were talking about the credit card example there, there's two levels of that for me. There's a literal thing of you are indebted to yourself and to others because you have to pay back. But that made me think of also the idea of being indebted as a metaphor as well. So if we lose self-control in X, Y, and Z, it could be in our physical health and our relationships where we did something now that actually that's going to come and bite us back. That is like becoming indebted to the world because this is what conscience is as well, isn't it? I think it's your conscience that kicks in to say, it's going to cost me, or at least, or maybe I'll get away with it, you know. But again, in that moment of conscience kicking in, that's something to think about, isn't it? You know, think about whenever your consciousness kicks in, maybe you're about to get a metaphorical credit card debt with some other area of your life if you don't exercise self-control.
Yeah, you're right. It applies to every area of life. Yeah, it's not just a financial thing, right? You're absolutely right. And I mean, and then some of it gets even more serious. If you really fail to control yourself, you're going to end up literally losing your freedom because you're going to be in prison, right? If you get really crazy and fail to say no to any desire that you have. So, and again, I think that's a countercultural message. And that may come, from my faith tradition, is thinking, sometimes the culture tells us, indulge every desire, just grab for that, buy it now, do it if it feels good. But sometimes we got to go, you know what, how's that actually going to affect my life going forward? And if the answer is that it's going to make it worse, then exercising a little self-control does a lot of good for you in the future.
I'd like to actually layer on some things about universal laws, because I think actually, whether it be in the context of Christianity or indeed something that I would call natural law, which is something that people can go and study, there are certain universal laws that if you violate them, then whether it be karma or judgment or guilt or legal proceedings, whatever, things come back to bite you. So, for example, one of the ideas of universal laws, which of course links to the Ten Commandments, is that you shouldn't steal. Right. So if you steal, guess what? There's going to be repercussions. You shouldn't rape. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't violate the property of someone else. You shouldn't coerce other people. These are terminologies that you'll recognize from the Ten Commandments, but also I've studied in the context of what's called universal law. And that's the idea of that is it's meant to be something that, it's just generally a whole objective truth. And it's kind of like a cause and effect way of looking at the universe and the world and saying, it's going to come back and bite you. So actually that, as you say, it kind of goes counter to consumeristic, you can have it all now culture, because it holds us accountable. But, karma or whatever you want to call it is quite the thing. It will come back to you.
No, I think you're right. It's interesting. I think we talk about scientific reality. Oh, it's demonstrable. There are laws. It's concrete. But then we say, but then when it comes to spirituality and morality, it's all just, wishy-washy, up for grabs. But the truth is, there's a lot of commonality when you look across different worldviews and belief systems about, don't kill, don't rape, don't lie, don't steal, and then also the positive things, like Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, right? And as you do those things that I think we can all agree are virtuous things to do, not only are they good because they acknowledge the dignity and worth of your fellow man, but they also come back to you as well And if you fail to do them, of course, there are negative results that we all experience.
One of the things that I personally believe, and it's a bit of a tangent, but I think I'll just say it because it's interesting. One of the things I truly believe is that every human being has divinity within them, and I don't need to be a Christian to say that, right? You know, I just,
Right.
it's just that I feel and know. So like when I see someone on the street and you acknowledge each other and you really kind of look into their eyes and there's an acknowledgement, and it's like I see that there's something inside of you there. I recognize you for the being that you are. You're not just meat and bones, right?
Right.
What's your take on that as a Christian?
Oh man, well, yeah, that's part and parcel of Christian theology, because kind of the foundational theology, I would say, of the Christian faith is what we call the Imago Dei. That's just Latin for the image of God, and it means that we believe that every single person, if you're holding a Christian theology, every single person on earth is created in the Imago Dei, the image of God, and therefore, because, like you said, the spark of divinity within them. And because of that kind of divine origin that we have, that everyone is worthy of love, dignity, respect. And you can't use people as a means to an end or a tool to accomplish your purposes, right? And so, yeah, I think that's just a good starting point. I mean, incidentally, of course, it's the basis of all human rights. As we've developed our legal system, in the Western world anyway. And so, yeah, that's, and it's easy to forget though, just interpersonally, because I think sometimes it's easy to deny, go, that person's a jerk, or I don't like that person, I'm going to treat them badly or use them. But it's a good reminder to go, no, you don't want someone to do that to you. And if you really believe that they have that spark of divinity within them, you'll treat them differently.
Oh, I'm so passionate about this. I really am. And I think it's something that, can and should be practiced. And it's interesting because if you want to, the intellectual paradox is as such. If you want to think about it and go, is that statement true? Then it's interesting. To me, that's entirely intellectually valid to say that's why there are laws. And it doesn't matter whether you call it universal laws or the 10 Commandments. It doesn't matter. But whatever it is, the point is that there's a valid intellectual reason as to why they exist, because we don't get to just, do bad things to other people that are divine beings, right? So to me, that makes sense intellectually. And if you then go back and say, well, that doesn't make sense because you're just talking about a belief system and that's dogma. Well, yeah, but then do you know what I'll say to that? I think that spirituality or religion is an experience. And once you've experienced that, so for example, once you've experienced a connection with something, then I think you then to start, that's, to me, that's part of belief. And it's not just faith. It helps faith. But it's kind of like, if you can experience a connection with God, with a divinity, with whatever you want to call it, then yeah, my point is that once you've experienced it, that's enough of a foundation to also go like, of course that's true.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because, I've talked to people that have a certain philosophy that says, human beings, there's nothing special or divine about us. And actually, there's no such thing as right and wrong. You can kind of treat people however you want to. And they might adhere to that intellectually. But then when it comes to their lived experience, I find that they're actually quite gracious and they do just functionally live as though everyone has dignity and inherent worth. So I think, as humans, at least if we're paying any sort of attention, we realize that other people are not just expendable objects, but creatures of infinite worth, and that we have to treat them as such.
This comes back down to integration again. We talked earlier on about, the idea that we're holistic, integrated beings. If you access integration and don't just be in the mind and don't just think that it's all empty and meaningless, then you can't deny it. You can have an intellectual argument with someone and kind of go, oh yes, but I think that, like you just said, but actually in real life, you are more integrated and you've got feelings and you want to be treated a certain way. And that's actually that's postmodernism talking about there. Literally there's the philosophical movement of postmodernism, which says that it's all meaningless. And there are certain speakers in the world that are calling us back to these two core principles of divinity within and also sovereignty. So like personal sovereignty. I want to also ask your take on that as a Christian, because that's interesting to me. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's part of the two core tenets of the Judaic Christian tradition. It's divinity within and personal sovereignty. What's your take?
Right. Yeah, and that's a controversial topic within Christianity, right? But
Okay.
I think at the very least, most theologians would affirm the idea that we do have free will, that
Okay.
of course, that we're created by God, and that we have certain obligations on our lives from our Creator. But at the same time, we get to choose. I mean, you go back to the Sunday school lessons of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? And they get to choose: are they going to eat the fruit? Are they not? And so I think it's not a sort of belief system that lets people off the hook for their bad choices, but actually encourages us. You know what? In light of the knowledge that you have and what you've been told to do, that you need to make the right decision. And so I think that's why there's a rich heritage of at least in the church, and it's interesting because I think we've lost it in modern times, but a focus on virtue formation, character formation, right? And I think it's fallen on hard times in the church lately, because sometimes a lot of Christians are almost allergic to talking about that because they go, oh, that seems too legalistic or weird. But going right back to, well, actually to the Greeks and then to Augustine, there was this very rich tradition of, okay, first of all, what is the good life? Let's define that. And then let's become the kind of people that we need to be as far as character in order to live that good life.
Right. I mean, you mentioned free will there, and then a very, very, very excellent synopsis of it. I think that, again, if we talk about constraints, free will, when combined with the existence of sovereignty, by definition, puts a constraint on our behavior. Because basically, if everyone is sovereign, then if you invade on someone else's personal sovereignty, whether that be the physicality, that it's a social constraint, right? So you don't get to do certain things without there being a kickback because you're invading on someone's sovereignty, and that I think is that's very to me, that's very empowering. The idea that we are sovereign divine beings, right? So that means that I get to honor and respect who you are because I see you as you are. And also I have the sacred right to defend myself as well, literally. And that's not just talking about physical things. It's talking about the idea that, hey, no, I'm my own being, right? So that is a wonderful mixture when you put it in with free will, because the onus is again on the individual to behave correctly.
Right. And I think within the Christian framework, freedom or free will isn't unlimited, right? It stops when you start impinging on someone else's freedom, first of all, right? And hurting them, and limiting their ability to exercise free will. And also, it's not the freedom to do things that are destructive even to yourself and to others. Yes. It's really freedom to say no to your baser impulses and to act upon the more noble calling upon your life. That's freedom. Because I think a lot of people these days, they think freedom is just do whatever the heck you want, right? Oh, I'm going to just eat whatever I want, sleep with 1,000 people, just kind of indulge every sort of desire I have. But at least in the Christian perspective, it's the freedom to master your own desires and do what is really best for you ultimately.
Exactly. Because I mean, I found this very interesting because the leading question to this conversation we just had, it was, how can self-control lead to personal freedom? But what we did is I feel we took that subject and we went even deeper and said, well, yes, it's about self-control, but it's within a context of divinity within, sovereignty, and free will.
Yeah, man, this got deep. I love it.
I said to my audience yesterday, I said, we go deep or we go home. No point not doing anything else.
That's a good tagline. I love it.
Exactly. Life is meaningful. Let's have a chat about it. Yeah, and there you go. And as you said, that can go somewhat counter in theory to consumerism and blah blah blah. But guess what? It's the reality, and it's the way of the universe. So whether it's religious, spirituality, or just the way things are, that's the way life is. It's hard to kind of deny. So that's my little 2 cents on the wisdom that we can take from it.
I love it. I love it. This has been a lot of fun.
There's a meeting point, isn't there? This is why I love having conversations from different traditions and mindsets and practices, because actually what we find is that we've all got a message for each other, and that not 100%, but literally there is always going to be overlap, and it's in the overlap a slightly different perspective that we all kind of grow and expand.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's one reason I wanted in the book, I kind of go into the science and the spirituality of this topic, yes. Because I think if you kind of just look at one, you're not really getting the full picture. And so, yeah, I learned a lot. Of course, I learned a lot from the Bible. I was pretty familiar with a lot of those passages, but it was really fascinating for me as a person of faith to look at what the psychologists and sociologists had to say as well. because there's a maxim that I adhere to that is all truth is God's truth. So wherever you find truth, you should use it to make your life better and to love other people properly.
Absolutely. Let me ask you another question on a bit of a random tangent, but I believe that in your book you talk about anger. Is that right?
A little bit, yeah. That's just kind of one of those common areas, I think, that people fail to exercise self-control. And as you probably have heard, when you indulge anger and you really kind of blow your top,
Yes.
It's reinforcing that behavior by wearing certain neural pathways in your brain. And so it's one of those things that's incredibly hard to short circuit, and you really need a plan. And those things that trigger you. And so before you get in that situation where you're really triggered and angry, you have to do some pre-planning and have a plan in place. Usually I start screaming and do this, but instead I'm going to do that. And you have a clear plan in place to kind of short circuit that bad habit and create a good one.
Right. So it's almost like a spark plug in a V8 Mustang. You can have the spark plug, but if you then pour all that gas onto it, then that's what anger is, isn't it? That it's just, it self-fuels its own fire as well as being ignited.
Yep. And it's a learned behavior. I mean, in a sense, maybe you can't control what makes you angry, but you can control your reaction to it. I believe that. Yeah.
I mean, what I'm also gleaning from this is that what I'm hearing from you is that there's wisdom in knowing just how quickly it can escalate, and that it does tend to self-fulfill. So it's kind of almost one of the wisdoms there is preventative, like acknowledgement that it could go bad. So I'm going to try the best I can to prevent getting to that point from a point of self-control as well.
Yes, that's right. One of the things I read when I was researching this is what Starbucks does with their employees. Okay. They have this script that they write out. When a customer says this to me, and like it's a nasty thing, I will respond by saying this. And I love it because it's like, yeah, you got to deal with all these pre-caffeinated, angry customers. And instead of just kind of reacting in the moment, which is probably not going to be good, you've got this script in your head to react in a different way. And sometimes we need to I don't know if it gets that detailed, you actually write it out. But if you know that there's someone who really triggers you or a situation that makes you angry, man, write out a script and go, okay, next time that happens, I'm going to do this rather than just kind of react.
Sounds like Starbucks employees are like Marines at boot camp. They're getting trained for pressure.
Hey, man, they know what they're doing, I guess. There's one of every corner in my neck of the woods.
But that's so translatable to marriage, relationships, friendships, right? I tend to do this when I get angry, and this has an effect. So just out of interest, can you make the connection to self-control? Because I guess like you've got, all right, so I want to make a link to the future self concept, which is, a key tenet of the book. So I totally appreciate that if we get angry, we can lose self-control, but then what's the link to the future self?
Yeah. Well, first of all, in a sense, self-control is a bit of a misnomer, right? Because it's not just always about controlling yourself. It's often, doing things like planning, a script that you're going to use in a difficult situation, or better yet, avoiding a situation that's going to make you angry or tempt you in the first place so that you don't have to control yourself. And then we mentioned this earlier, but man, it's having friends that will keep you accountable and inspire you and encourage you. This isn't a solitary virtue that you're going to develop just all by yourself. Okay. People like to think, I can just pull myself up by my bootstraps and live this awesome, disciplined life. That's a fantasy. You need other people around you that are going to encourage you and keep you accountable. So having said all that, yeah, once you get the proper help and the planning, the intentionality to actually exercise self-control, then again, man, that is going to pay huge dividends in the future, because you're going to avoid certain behaviors that sabotage your life, like freaking out and getting angry, like eating too much, like being sedentary, like spending too much. And then you're also going to proactively engage in the kind of behaviors that are going to make your life better, because you're going to be able to do that. So, and then that all pays off down the road, and not just, years down the road, but even days and weeks.
Absolutely. Well, Drew, it really has been a pleasure having a chat with you. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been a chat about life, theology, control, future, the whole lot. And I like rounding out things. So it's been a real pleasure. So the name of your book is Your Future Self Will Thank You, Secrets to Self-Control from the Bible and Brain Science. Where's right. the best place for people to get a copy of that if they wish?
Yeah, well, there's a little bookstore here in the States called Amazon.com.
Oh, it's tiny, right? Yeah.
Just tiny, just little. No, it's on Amazon, and I think most other book distributors carry it as well. If you want to check me out online, I spend way too much time on Twitter, and that's just my name, Drew Dyck, and my website's drewdyck.com.
I'm so sorry. I've been calling you Drew Dyck through the whole thing. It's Drew Dyck. I'm so sorry, mate.
That is no problem at all. I answer to either.
I was wondering if you had, like, some kind of like Dutch origins or something going on there. But there we go.
Yeah, it's like it's Dutch Mennonite name. Absolutely.
That little bit of ginger hair on your beard there as well.
Oh yeah, you're in here and in here. Absolutely.
See, the Dutch, they like their orange. They like their orange.
You got me.
Oh, mate, you've been a very, very playful chat. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Drew Dyck from Moody Publishers, the author of Your Future Self Will Thank You, Secrets of Self-Control from both the Bible and Brain Science. It's been a real pleasure, sir. All the best with your good work ahead, and thank you for having a chat with me today.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure.